Hello everybody. My name is Benjy. I am an HSI teacher, one of the HSI core teachers. I've been teaching at the school for the past couple of years, and I'm currently teaching the April 2017 group. They're here for 2 months. Today we went to Tel Gezer on our first tour, had a really amazing time. But I've been asked to come onto our Facebook group in order to give a short class, an interactive class, a little bit about Yom HaShoa, because as many of you will know, in Israel and across the Jewish world tonight, we are all marking a memory and remembering Yom HaShoa v'Gvura, the Heroes and Shoah Memorial Day, and I wanted to create kind of like an interactive class. If there's anybody out there listening to me at all, give me a like if there is somebody, and deal with this question about why is Yom HaShoa actually today. Today's date, the Hebrew date tonight, is actually the 28th of Nisan, Kafchet Nisan, but actually the real date should be the 27th of Nisan, but it was put off a day so that it wouldn't have been coincide with Saturday night, with Motzei Shabbat and preparations for Shabbat last night. So tonight is the night of Yom HaShoa, and it's marked in Israel by various events that take place. The first event that takes place at 8 o'clock tonight, it's happening right now as we are speaking over at Yad Vashem in Yerushalayim, is the national event, or the national ceremony for the Holocaust Memorial, and the centerpiece of that is our 6 Holocaust survivors lighting 6 torches in memory of the 6 million who perished in the Shoah, in the Holocaust. That happens tonight. Tomorrow morning, there's another central national event at Yad Vashem, which is kicked off though by 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. All of the sirens go off in the country, and the whole of the country goes totally silent for 2 whole minutes, as the whole of the country stops. Cars stop, shops, schools, places of work, everybody literally shuts down and dedicates 2 minutes to remembering the victims of the Shoah. Across the country, different ceremonies in schools, etc., etc. And this is how we in Israel today are marking Yom HaShoa. But what I wanted to look into today, in our session together, is the question of why today? Why today, the Hebrew equivalent date, 27th to the 28th of Nisan? Why is it today? Well, the decision to create today as the the national day of memory of Yom HaShoa was actually reached in 1951, and it wasn't a given that it would be this date. There were many different a few different options available to the committee, and what I'd like to do in the time that we have together is talk about the different options that was put on the table to discuss about the different dates in the Jewish calendar of when Yom HaShoa should be, and I'd like us to kind of like recreate that committee, and through the power of the like buttons, I'd like to do some like voting about you and get you guys, whoever's out there listening live to this video, to decide in your opinions what should be the correct date for Yom HaShoa. So let's go through the different options that were put forward, and I'd like to see what you guys think. You can comment, you can like, you can tell me. Let's try and have a bit of a discussion right now about what you think. What you think should be the correct date for Yom HaShoa. So the first option that was given was an interesting one, which was to be the ultimate date of Jewish mourning in the Jewish calendar, which is Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. The originates back in the time of the Bible, during according to the tradition, the time when the spies cried over the believing that they couldn't go into the land of Israel, and then God says, you cried for no reason, and I'm going to make this a day that you will cry in the future. And in fact, Tisha B'Av was the date in which both the first and the second temple was destroyed, and many believed that this day of national tragedy, with many other different events throughout Jewish history taking place on Tisha B'Av, it was fitting that that should be the date for Yom HaShoa. And the reason being was absolutely ideological. There was a sense that the reason for the fact that the Shoah took place was because the Jewish people were in exile. When did the exile start? With the destruction of the temples on Tisha B'Av, first of all, by the Babylonians and then by the Romans. And it's because we were in exile that persecution takes place. It's because we were in exile that there was a Holocaust. If there wouldn't have been an exile, if it wouldn't have been a destruction of the temple, if we would have been a sovereign-owned country, maybe, who knows, there wouldn't have been such a persecution. And there was a sense in Israel to turn around and say, our memory of the Holocaust should be linked to that eternal tragedy of the Jewish people, which is Tisha B'Av. Some even argued as well, it's also a date that was infamous in the history of the Holocaust, because it was actually the date of the beginning of the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, the transport of Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto to their deaths in the death camp in Treblinka started on Tisha B'Av of 1942. So many believe that that should be the date of the where we remember Yom HaShoa, the day that we remember the Holocaust. So, is there anybody out there that agrees with that opinion? If you think that, I think you can do different faces. So let's do like, I don't know, let's just do a like for this one. So if anybody thinks that Tisha B'Av should be a good date, let's count and see how many people out there now think that Tisha B'Av should be a date. Anyone out there thinks that Tisha B'Av should be the right date to commemorate the Holocaust? No one out there. Well, it was actually... someone out there thinks though, maybe it should be. Another person, I think that's 2 responses. It was, as you probably worked out, rejected by the committee. Why was it rejected? Because it was felt that the Holocaust shouldn't be just folded into the general tragedies. I think there's 4 or 5 that the people thought that should be the right one. And there was a feeling that there should be something separate and different to commemorate the Holocaust. So that was date number 1 that was rejected. The second date that was put forward was actually a date that was put forward by many German Jews that came to Israel already from the 1930s and then after the war as well. And the date that many of the German Jews put forward was the night of Kristallnacht, the 9th to the 10th of November, commemorating the first ever violent pogrom by the Nazi Germany against the Jews of Germany. It took place in the context of 1938. There was more and more persecution against the Jews in Germany, climaxing in this top-down riots where literally thousands of synagogues were destroyed. Thousands of Jewish businesses were destroyed. For the first time, Jews were sent from Germany to concentration camps specifically because they were Jews. In total, around about 90 Jews were actually murdered on that night. And many of the German Jews living in Israel really believed that this should be the date for the commemoration of Yom HaShoa. And the reason being because this really represents the beginning of the violent persecution of Jews by the Nazis. And many German Jews believe that this should be the date. Anyone out there, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think that they were right, these German Jews? The first ever violent pogrom against the Jews? Would that be a fitting day to be the day of memorial? 1, 2, 2 people have clicked to that and saying that that's a good idea. The truth is that the committee rejected it. And the reason why the committee rejected it is there was a sense that even though they had an argument, this was there's a couple more out there, 4 out there believe that that should be the date. The committee rejected it though because it was basically a sense that it was something that was unique just for the German Jewish experience. And as we know, when we're dealing with the Holocaust, it goes far beyond the Jews of Germany. The numbers of the Jews of Germany that were killed compared to, for example, the Jews in the Soviet Union, or especially in Poland, where virtually over 90% of the Jews out of the 3.3 million Jews of Poland, over 3 million of them were murdered in the Holocaust. There was a sense that this kind of Kristallnacht takes away from that the grandeur of that tragedy. So, just like Tisha B'Av, the night of the 9th and 10th of November was also rejected by the committee. The third option that was given as to be the national day for Yom HaShoa was actually a date that would already been fixed into the calendar by the rabbinate, by the rabbinic authorities in Israel. And they had decided already in 1949, 2 years earlier, to make Asara B'Tevet, the fast day, the traditional fast day of Asara B'Tevet, to be what they called Yom Kaddish Klali, a day in which where Holocaust survivors that did not know the date of the murder of their loved ones, that wanted to have a day to say Kaddish, to remember, a day to light a candle and to say Kaddish in memory of their loved one, when they didn't know the actual date when they were murdered, the rabbinate decided to use this first day of Asara B'Tevet that traditionally marks the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, in the 6th century, in 586 BCE. They decided to use that as the date for Asara B'Tevet, as this Yom Kaddish Klali. Again, linking the Holocaust to the eternal story of Jews in exile and the consequences of Jews being in exile. Why specifically Asara B'Tevet? This question really intrigued me. Why did they choose Asara B'Tevet as opposed to any of the other fast days, Shivasa B'Tammuz, Tzom Gedalia maybe, after Rosh Hashanah? There's other dates of fasting that are associated throughout the calendar with the destruction of the temple and the exile. And my research led me into a few dead ends, and no one really could give me an answer until I heard one answer that I think makes the most sense historically. It goes back to 1942, while the war was taking place. The summer of 1942 really was one of the worst summers in the history of the Jewish people. 1942 was the height of the murder of the Jews of Poland, took place through the first half of that year, climaxing in the destruction of the second largest Jewish city in the world, Warsaw, in the summer of 1942, where close to over 300,000 Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto were taken to be murdered in the death camp in Treblinka. That all took place in the summer between Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur of 1942. Word of the destruction of the Jews of Warsaw filtered through into the Jewish community, the Yishuv, living in what was Palestine at the time, living in Eretz Yisrael at the time. Word came through that end summer, the beginning of that fall, there was evidence, or people started to understand what was happening to the Jews of Warsaw. And therefore the rabbinate, the following fast day, in the traditional fast day in the calendar anyway, was chosen to be a day of mourning and fasting for the Holocaust that was taking place in Europe in that very, very year. The epicenter of these events of a day of prayer and fasting for the fate of the Jews of Europe was centered around the Great Synagogue in Tel Aviv, and that first time that ever happened in the following winter of after the summer of 1942, on that first Asara B'Tevet, that is when they carried out this first day of mourning and crying and prayer is a reaction to what was going on. A year went by, the Holocaust was carrying on, and the rabbinate decided again in 1943 to carry on, make Asara B'Tevet subsequently another a day of crying and mourning for the Holocaust that was taking place. It happened again in 1944, and then in 1945, after the end of the war, when survivors were beginning to come to Israel, and there was the beginning of this question that they asked the rabbinate, when should we be say Kaddish? Well, they said, we've got this date anyway, Asara B'Tevet, that we've been using as a date for memorial for this Yom Kaddish Klali, this day where anybody can say Kaddish when they don't know the date. So therefore they decided, let's make this a permanent day in memory of the Holocaust. And there was a big debate. There was a strong voice, especially amongst the rabbinot and the religious Zionist political parties in the country at the time, really pushed for this date to be the date. What do you think, guys? Anyone agree with the rabbinate at the time, Asara B'Tevet? No one out there wants to agree with that one? Okay. It's interesting because the big fight was basically between the religious Zionists that wanted to push for this date of Asara B'Tevet and the secular kibbutz movement had another date in mind, and their date was the 14th of Nisan. Why the 14th of Nisan? Because that was the day of, by the way, on the night after the 14th of Nisan, it's the day before Pesach, is Seder night, and that was the date which was the Hebrew equivalent of the 19th of April of 1943, of the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And the secular Zionist kibbutz movement really wanted to push forward with that date, and they wanted the date associated with the Warsaw Ghetto uprising to be the date that commemorates the Holocaust. Why? Because there was a lot of ideology involved in it. There was a lot of there was a feeling that Yom HaShoa shouldn't just be about the Jew as the victim. It should also be about the heroism of the Holocaust, of the Jews during the time of the Holocaust, especially those that heroically fought back in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, the first ever civilian urban uprising across Nazi Europe took place by the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto in that April of 1943, and that great heroism, this might of those Jews saying that Jewish life is not worth it. It shouldn't be left to be free. Jewish life is worth something. If we are going to die, we're going to die with honor, fighting. That should be the date. That should be the date that that should commemorate not just the victims of the Holocaust, but also the heroism. It's our Yom HaShoa is not just called Yom HaShoa; it's Yom HaShoa v'Gvura, and heroism. So this should really be the date. What's the obvious problem, though, with the 14th of Nisan being our national Holocaust memorial date? It's Erev Pesach. It's the beginning of Passover. Everybody's getting ready for the wonderful Pesach Seder night preparation. It was obviously totally impractical from like any serious point of view to kind of like what would happen to this date if it was just folded into Pesach? Would people commemorate it properly? Would they not? And certainly the religious community within Israel obviously had a huge problem with it. Pesach is a joyous time. Pesach is a celebration. It's celebrating our freedom. It's celebrating the exodus of Egypt, the birth of the Jewish nation. We're gonna mix that up, and with Yom HaShoa, with the memorial, the Holocaust memorial day, that just doesn't make sense. So therefore the kibbutz movement turned around and said, you know what, or the secular voices within the committee turned around and said, let's do it straight after Pesach then. And then the rabbinate turned around and says, no, you can't do it. The whole of Nisan is meant to be a month of joy and celebration. And eventually, as part of a compromise that actually neither side were actually pretty happy with, they ended up compromising and saying a week or so after Pesach, on the 26th of Nisan, that will be the date of Yom HaShoa. It didn't satisfy the survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising because it was too far away from the outbreak of the uprising, and it didn't satisfy the religious either. Why didn't it say? Because it was still in the month of Nisan, which is meant to be a month of joy. However, there was another reason why this date was ultimately decided upon, was its connection to what Israel is going to mark next week, which is Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaTzmaut. There was a sense that there was a real natural flow to our national holidays. This sense of going May Shoah L'Tkuma in Hebrew, which means from the Shoah, from the Holocaust, to the uprising and the celebration of the state of Israel. They felt that there was like a natural progression of marking the consequences of the exile, which was the Shoah, and then as not a historical response to that, but more as kind of an ideological response to that, though, is obviously the state of Israel and the fact that we're going to be an independent Jewish life. And so that's why ultimately the 26th of Nisan was chosen. It didn't satisfy the survivors of the Watergate uprising, didn't satisfy the religious, but it was felt that this was a fitting date because that really linked in with the national holidays that we're celebrating over these next couple of weeks. So anyone out there think that they made if you think that the Rabbanut the committee made the right choice, give me a smiley face out of those four options. If you think they made the bad choice, do like an angry face. Can you do that with your, can you do that with the options? Anyone out there, what do you think? Did they make the right choice or not? Okay, well, whether they did or didn't, whatever your opinions are of it, thank you for liking that. Whatever you think, your opinions of it, that this is now a Yom HaShoa in Israel, a date, this very important day in Israel, where we remember the 6 million victims of the Holocaust in Europe in those terrible years. And as I sign off for the end of this little class or this discussion on Yom HaShoa in Israel, I bless us all that really the whole of Bnei Yisrael, the whole of our people, should never know any more suffering, and we should Shoah should really represent the last ever terrible tragedy of the Jewish people, and we should only know peace in the world, and that should be our prayers on Yom HaShoa, never to forget the suffering of the victims and to ensure that nothing like that ever happens again. So that's me signing off. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I hope it was interesting for you out there. And thank you very much. Be well, everybody.